Hello horror lovers, welcome to our channel. If spine-chilling true stories are your nightly ritual, you've come to the right place. Before we dive into tonight's terrifying tales, make sure to subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to me. Don't forget to like this video and share where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support helps us bring you the best in real horror storytelling. Now, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and prepare for a night filled with true nightmares. Let's get into the story.
My name is Emma, and I am a park ranger in the dense, sprawling woods of Oregon. My job involves ensuring the safety of both the forest and the people who visit it. I've seen a lot of strange things during my time in the woods, but nothing could prepare me for what I encountered one fateful night. It all began when reports started coming in about strange sightings and eerie howls echoing through the forest. Campers and hikers claimed to have seen a large, wolf-like creature lurking in the shadows. At first, we dismissed these reports as misidentifications of local wildlife, or the result of overactive imaginations fueled by campfire stories. However, the sightings continued to increase, and the descriptions grew more detailed and consistent. People spoke of a creature that walked on two legs, with glowing yellow eyes and a snarling maw full of sharp teeth. The fear in their voices was unmistakable, and it became clear that something was out there, something we couldn't ignore. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to conduct a night patrol in the area where most of the sightings had been reported. I set out just before dusk, armed with a flashlight, a radio, and my trusty sidearm. The forest was quiet as I made my way along the narrow trails, the only sounds being the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. As night fell, the forest took on an eerie, almost otherworldly quality. The full moon cast long shadows through the trees, illuminating the path ahead. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, and every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig set my nerves on edge. Hours passed without incident, and I began to think that perhaps the reports were just exaggerated tales after all. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard a low, guttural growl coming from the darkness. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, and slowly turned in the direction of the sound. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was the creature. It was taller than any man I had ever seen, with matted fur covering its muscular body. Its eyes glowed an unnatural yellow, and its lips were pulled back in a snarl, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. The creature let out a howl that seemed to shake the very ground beneath my feet. I raised my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness and illuminating the creature's face. It recoiled slightly, but didn't retreat. Instead, it began to circle me, its eyes never leaving mine. I could feel the primal fear rising within me, but I forced myself to stay calm and think rationally. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. The creature paused for a moment, as if considering my words, then continued its slow, deliberate circle. I knew that I had to act quickly if I wanted to survive this encounter. I reached for my radio, but before I could call for backup, the creature lunged at me with incredible speed. I barely had time to react, drawing my sidearm and firing a shot. The bullet struck the creature in the shoulder, causing it to howl in pain and anger. It swiped at me with its massive claws, knocking the gun from my hand and sending me sprawling to the ground. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing a fallen branch to defend myself. The creature advanced, its eyes filled with fury. I swung the branch with all my strength, striking the creature across the face. It staggered back, momentarily dazed, and I took the opportunity to run. I sprinted through the forest, branches whipping against my face and tearing at my clothes. I could hear the creature's heavy footsteps behind me, gaining with each passing second. I knew that I couldn't outrun it forever, and my mind raced for a solution. Just as I thought I was done for, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. I burst through the door, slamming it shut behind me and barricading it with whatever furniture I could find. I could hear the creature outside, growling and scratching at the door. I grabbed my radio and finally managed to call for backup, my voice shaking as I explained the situation. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, the creature's relentless attempts to break through the door, filling me with dread. Finally, I heard the sound of sirens and the voices of my fellow rangers. The creature let out one final, furious howl before retreating into the darkness. The rangers arrived, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. They found me huddled in the corner of the cabin, shaken but unharmed. I told them everything, describing the creature in as much detail as I could. They were skeptical, but the fear and desperation in my voice must have convinced them that something serious had happened. We searched the area thoroughly, but there was no sign of the creature. The only evidence of the encounter was the deep claw marks on the door, and the blood where my bullet had struck it. Despite the lack of physical evidence, the rangers took my report seriously and increased patrols in the area. Over the following weeks, the sightings and reports gradually ceased. It was as if the creature had vanished, leaving only the haunting memory of that night. I returned to my duties, but the experience left a lasting impact on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still out there, watching and waiting. I began researching the legends of werewolves and similar creatures, hoping to find some explanation for what I had encountered. The more I learned, the more I realized how little we truly understand about the natural world and the mysteries it holds. To this day, I continue my work as a park ranger, but I am always vigilant, especially during the full moon. The encounter with the werewolf has changed the way I see the forest, reminding me that there are forces out there beyond our comprehension. And no matter how much we try to rationalize and explain the unknown, there will always be mysteries that defy explanation, lurking in the shadows of the moonlit forest. My name is Jacob, and I've lived in the small town of Blackwood for my entire life. Nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains, Blackwood is a close-knit community, where everyone knows each other, and secrets are hard to keep. But there was one secret that had lingered in the shadows for generations: the legend of the Blackwood werewolf. Growing up, I heard the stories from my grandfather. He spoke of a monstrous creature that roamed the forest on the outskirts of town, its howls echoing through the night. Some said it was a cursed man, doomed to transform into a beast under the light of the full moon. Others believed it was an ancient spirit, protecting the land from those who would harm it. Regardless of the origin, the werewolf was a part of Blackwood's history, a tale whispered around campfires and recounted with a shiver. As a teenager, I was skeptical of such stories. I spent countless nights camping in the woods with friends, laughing off the howls and strange noises as the sounds of wildlife. But that all changed one fateful autumn night when I was 17. It was late October, and the town was preparing for Halloween. The air was crisp, and the forest was alive with the vibrant colors of fall. My friends and I decided to have one last camping trip before the weather turned cold. We packed our gear and hiked deep into the woods, to a clearing we had discovered years ago. The first night was uneventful. We sat around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories. The howls we heard in the distance were dismissed as coyotes, and we went to bed without a second thought. But on the second night, everything changed. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the forest. As we sat by the fire, we heard a howl, louder and more haunting than any we had heard before. It seemed to resonate deep within our bones, sending a chill down our spines. My friends tried to laugh it off, but I could see the fear in their eyes. "Probably just a wolf," Eric said, trying to sound confident. "They're rare around here, but not impossible." We all nodded, but the unease lingered. The howls continued, growing closer and more distinct. They were unlike any animal sound we had ever heard, deep, guttural, and filled with an almost human-like anguish. "Maybe we should head back to town," Sarah suggested, her voice trembling. "This doesn't feel right." But before we could make a decision, we heard something moving in the trees. The firelight cast flickering shadows, and we could see a large, dark shape moving just beyond the edge of the clearing. It was watching us. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky. The shape stepped forward, revealing itself in the moonlight. It was massive, standing on two legs, with fur as dark as the night, and eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. Its snout was elongated, filled with sharp teeth, and its hands ended in long, clawed fingers. It was the werewolf. Panic set in, and we scrambled to grab our things. The creature let out a roar, and we bolted into the woods, our only thought to get as far away as possible. We ran blindly, the sounds of the beast pursuing us through the darkness. I could hear my friends shouting, their voices filled with terror. I stumbled and fell, the impact knocking the wind out of me. As I struggled to get up, I saw the werewolf emerging from the trees, its eyes locked onto me. I thought it was the end. But then, something incredible happened. A figure appeared between me and the beast, an old man with a staff, his presence commanding and calm. He began to chant in a language I didn't understand, and the werewolf hesitated, its growls turning to whimpers. The man stepped forward, raising his staff. The werewolf let out one final howl and retreated into the forest, disappearing into the shadows. I was left lying on the ground, gasping for breath, as the old man turned to me. "Are you all right, son?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. I nodded, still too stunned to speak. He helped me to my feet and led me back to the campsite, where my friends were waiting, equally shaken but unharmed. The old man introduced himself as Elias, a hermit who lived deep in the forest. He explained that the werewolf was real, a cursed man who had once been part of the town. Elias had dedicated his life to protecting Blackwood from the beast, using ancient rituals passed down through generations. Over the next few days, Elias taught us about the werewolf's origins. The creature was once a man named Thomas, who had been cursed by a vengeful spirit after committing a terrible crime. The curse transformed him into a werewolf, doomed to roam the forest and hunt under the full moon. Elias explained that the only way to break the curse was to confront the spirit and seek its forgiveness. It was a dangerous task, but my friends and I felt a sense of duty to help. We couldn't let the werewolf continue to terrorize our town. With Elias as our guide, we ventured deep into the forest, to a place known as the Spirit's Hollow. It was a place of power, where the veil between the worlds was thin. We performed the rituals as Elias instructed, calling upon the spirit to appear. The spirit manifested as a figure of light and shadow, its presence both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Elias spoke to it, recounting Thomas's crimes and pleading for mercy. The spirit listened, its expression inscrutable. After what felt like an eternity, the spirit spoke. It declared that Thomas's soul had suffered enough, and it was time for the curse to be lifted. With a wave of its hand, the spirit released Thomas from his torment, and we felt a surge of energy pass through the forest. The werewolf was gone. Thomas's spirit was free. We returned to Blackwood as heroes, the town forever changed by our encounter. The legend of the Blackwood werewolf had been laid to rest, but the experience left a lasting impression on all of us. I continued to work as a park ranger, dedicating my life to protecting the forest and its secrets. I never forgot the lessons I learned from Elias and the spirit, and I carried their wisdom with me always. The howls of Blackwood may have faded, but the memory of that fateful night remains. A reminder of the power of forgiveness and the enduring mystery of the natural world. My name is Ethan, and I've been a resident of the Yorkshire Dales for over 30 years. This region, with its rolling hills and expansive moors, is known for its beauty and tranquility. However, there is a darker side to these lands, a side that many locals prefer not to discuss: the legend of the Beast of the Moors. The legend dates back centuries, with tales of a monstrous creature that roams the moors under the cover of darkness. Descriptions of the beast vary, but most accounts speak of a large, wolf-like creature with a menacing presence. The Beast of the Moors was said to be responsible for the disappearance of livestock, and in some stories, even people. As a child, I was fascinated by these stories. My grandfather would tell me tales of the beast as we sat by the fireplace, his voice filled with both fear and reverence. He claimed to have seen it once, many years ago, and the memory of that encounter haunted him until his dying day. Despite the warnings and the fear that surrounded the legend, I found myself drawn to the moors. There was something about the vast, open landscape that called to me, and I spent countless hours exploring its hidden corners. But as I grew older, I began to understand why so many were wary of the moors at night. One evening, just before dusk, I decided to take a walk to clear my mind. My work as a historian had been particularly stressful, and the fresh air and solitude of the moors always helped me to relax. I set off along a familiar path, the fading light casting long shadows across the landscape. As I walked, I noticed something strange. The usual sounds of the moors, the distant calls of birds, the rustling of the wind through the grass seemed to have fallen silent. An eerie stillness settled over the land, and I felt a growing sense of unease. I quickened my pace, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the moors were bathed in the pale light of the rising moon. It was then that I heard a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. The growl came again, louder this time, and I turned to see a pair of glowing eyes watching me from the shadows. The beast of the moors. The creature stepped into the moonlight, and I saw it clearly for the first time. It was massive, with thick, matted fur and a powerful, muscular build. Its eyes burned with an otherworldly light, and its mouth was filled with sharp, glistening teeth. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. The beast began to circle me, its movements slow and deliberate. I could feel its hot breath on my skin, and the air was filled with the scent of decay and blood. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I spoke to the beast. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why do you haunt these moors?" To my surprise, the beast paused and seemed to regard me with a strange, almost human expression. It let out a low, mournful howl, and I felt a wave of sorrow wash over me. This was no ordinary creature. It was something far more complex and tragic. In that moment, I remembered my grandfather's stories. He had spoken of a curse that bound the beast to the moors, a curse that could only be broken by understanding and compassion. I knew what I had to do. "I understand your pain," I said softly, taking a step closer to the beast. "You are trapped here, suffering, and I want to help you." The beast's eyes softened, and it let out a sound that was almost a whimper. It lowered its head, and I reached out, placing my hand on its fur. The connection was instant, and I felt a surge of energy pass between us. Images flashed through my mind, scenes of a time long past, of a man who had been wronged and cursed to roam the moors as a beast. I saw the anguish and torment he had endured, and I felt a deep sense of empathy and sorrow. "I will help you," I promised, my voice filled with conviction. "I will find a way to break the curse and set you free." The beast looked at me with gratitude, and then, as if by some unspoken agreement, it turned and disappeared into the shadows. I was left standing on the moors, the weight of my promise heavy on my shoulders. Over the next few weeks, I dedicated myself to researching the legend of the beast of the moors. I scoured old texts and spoke to the few remaining elders who still remembered the old stories. Piece by piece, I began to unravel the mystery of the curse. The key, I discovered, lay in an ancient ritual that had been performed by the Druids who once inhabited these lands. The ritual involved a sacred stone circle hidden deep within the moors, a place where the veil between the worlds was thin. With the knowledge I had gathered, I set out to find the stone circle. It was a difficult and treacherous journey, but I was driven by the desire to help the tormented soul of the beast. After days of searching, I finally found the circle, its stones weathered and covered in moss. As night fell, I began the ritual, reciting the ancient words and making offerings to the spirits of the land. The air crackled with energy, and the ground seemed to hum beneath my feet. I could feel the presence of the beast, watching from the shadows. When the ritual was complete, I called out to the beast. "Come forth," I said, my voice steady. "It is time to end your suffering." The beast emerged from the darkness, its eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. It stepped into the circle, and I felt a surge of power as the stones began to glow with an ethereal light. The beast let out a howl, and its form began to change. The fur receded, the claws and teeth transformed, and before me stood a man, the man who had been cursed so long ago. He looked at me with tears in his eyes, his expression one of profound relief and gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse but filled with emotion. "You have freed me." I watched as the man slowly faded into the light, his spirit finally at peace. The stone circle returned to its normal state, and the moors were once again silent and still. I returned to Blackwood, the weight of my experience heavy on my heart. The legend of the Beast of the Moors had been laid to rest, but the memory of that night would stay with me forever. I had seen the true power of compassion and understanding, and it had changed me in ways I could never have imagined. The moors are still a place of beauty and mystery, but now, when I walk their paths, I do so with a sense of peace. I know that the spirit of the man who once roamed as the beast is finally free, and the legend of the Beast of the Moors has become a tale of redemption and hope. My name is Emily, and I've spent my entire life in the quaint town of Silver Pines. Nestled in the heart of a dense forest, Silver Pines is known for its picturesque scenery and serene atmosphere. But beneath its idyllic surface lies a dark secret that few dare to speak of: the curse of the Silver Pines werewolf. The legend has been part of our town's lore for as long as anyone can remember. It is said that once every generation, a werewolf is born into the community, cursed to transform under the light of the full moon. The creature is said to be a harbinger of doom, bringing tragedy and death to those it encounters. As a child, I dismissed these stories as nothing more than fairy tales meant to scare children. My friends and I would often laugh about the legend, even daring each other to venture into the forest on nights when the moon was full. We never saw anything out of the ordinary, and the werewolf remained a figment of our imaginations. But everything changed when I turned 21. It was the night of the Harvest Festival, a celebration that brought the entire town together. The moon was full, casting an ethereal glow over the festivities. I was enjoying the evening with my friends, dancing and laughing, when I felt a strange sensation wash over me. At first, I thought it was just the excitement of the night. But as the hours passed, the feeling grew stronger. My senses were heightened, and I could hear the whispers of the forest, the rustling of leaves, and the distant calls of animals. My body felt different, as if something inside me was waking up. I tried to ignore it, but as midnight approached, the sensation became unbearable. I felt an intense pain course through my body, and I knew something was terribly wrong. I excused myself from the festivities and hurried into the forest, desperate to be alone. As I reached a secluded clearing, the pain intensified, and I fell to the ground, writhing in agony. My vision blurred, and I felt my body begin to change. My hands elongated into claws, my teeth sharpened, and a thick coat of fur covered my skin. I let out a howl that echoed through the trees, a sound that was both terrifying and liberating. I had become the werewolf. The transformation was both exhilarating and horrifying. I could feel the power coursing through my veins, but I also felt an uncontrollable rage. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, and I struggled to maintain control. I knew I had to get as far away from the town as possible to prevent myself from hurting anyone. I ran through the forest, my senses sharp and my movements agile. The world seemed different, more vibrant and alive. But beneath the surface, I could feel the darkness of the curse, a shadow that threatened to consume me. As the night wore on, I encountered other creatures of the forest. They sensed my presence and kept their distance, their instincts warning them of the danger I posed. I felt a deep connection to the natural world, but also a profound loneliness. I was a part of it, yet separate, a monster among the trees. When the first light of dawn broke through the canopy, the transformation began to reverse. The pain returned, and I collapsed to the ground, my body reverting to its human form. Exhausted and disoriented, I made my way back to town, hoping no one had noticed my absence. Over the next few days, I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. I couldn't believe that the legend was real and that I was the cursed werewolf of Silver Pines. I tried to live my life as normally as possible, but the memory of that night haunted me. I needed answers. I sought out the town's historian, Mrs. Abernathy, hoping she could shed some light on the curse. She was an elderly woman, wise and kind, and she welcomed me into her home with a knowing look in her eyes. "I've been expecting you, Emily," she said, her voice gentle. "The curse has passed down through the generations, and now it is your burden to bear." Mrs. Abernathy explained that the curse was placed on our town centuries ago by a powerful witch. She had been wronged by the townspeople and sought revenge, cursing one person in each generation to become a werewolf. The only way to break the curse was to find the witch's descendant and seek their forgiveness. Armed with this knowledge, I set out on a quest to find the witch's descendant. It was a daunting task, but I was determined to free myself and future generations from the curse. My journey took me to distant towns and hidden covens, each step bringing me closer to the truth. After months of searching, I finally found the witch's descendant, a young woman named Lily, who lived in a secluded cabin deep in the forest. She was kind and compassionate, and when I told her my story, she listened with understanding and empathy. "I can help you," she said, her eyes filled with determination. "But breaking the curse will not be easy. It will require a powerful ritual, and you must confront the darkness within yourself." Together, we prepared for the ritual. Lily guided me through the process, teaching me the ancient incantations and gathering the necessary ingredients. The ritual would take place on the night of the full moon, in the very clearing where I had first transformed. As the night of the full moon approached, I felt a mix of fear and hope. The transformation was inevitable, but this time, I would face it with purpose. Lily and I arrived at the clearing, and she began the ritual, chanting the incantations and invoking the spirits of the forest. The transformation was as painful as ever, but this time, I felt a sense of clarity. I could see the darkness within me, the rage and pain that fueled the curse. But I also saw the light, the love and compassion that had guided me on my journey. With Lily's help, I confronted the darkness, embracing it and seeking to understand it. The ritual reached its climax, and I felt a surge of energy pass through me. The curse was lifted, and I was free. The relief was overwhelming, and I fell to the ground, tears streaming down my face. Lily knelt beside me, her expression one of joy and pride. "You did it, Emily," she said softly. "You broke the curse." I returned to Silver Pines with a newfound sense of peace. The legend of the werewolf would live on, but it would no longer be a tale of fear and tragedy. It would be a story of redemption and hope, a reminder that even the darkest curses can be broken with love and understanding. The town embraced me, and I became a symbol of resilience and strength. I dedicated my life to helping others, using my experience to guide those who struggled with their own inner demons. The forest, once a place of fear, became a sanctuary, a testament to the power of forgiveness and compassion. And so, the curse of Silver Pines was laid to rest, and the werewolf's howl was heard no more. But the memory of that journey, and the lessons learned, would remain with me forever, a beacon of light in the darkest of nights. My name is Daniel, and I've always been a skeptic when it comes to the supernatural. Ghost stories, urban legends, and tales of monsters lurking in the shadows never really fazed me. I grew up in the city, where the most frightening thing was the occasional mugger or a particularly aggressive stray dog. So, when my best friend Jake invited me to spend a weekend at his family's cabin in the remote town of Red Hollow, I accepted without hesitation, looking forward to a relaxing getaway. Red Hollow was a small, isolated town nestled in the foothills of a dense forest. The drive there was long and winding, with narrow roads that twisted through the thick trees. As we approached the town, the atmosphere seemed to change. The air grew cooler, and a sense of unease settled over me. Jake noticed my discomfort and laughed. "Don't worry, Danny," he said, slapping me on the back. "It's just a quiet little town. Nothing to be scared of." We arrived at the cabin just before sunset. It was a quaint, rustic place, surrounded by tall pines and overlooking a serene lake. Jake's family had owned it for generations, and it was filled with old furniture and the smell of wood smoke. We spent the evening fishing, grilling our catch, and reminiscing about our childhood adventures. As night fell, the forest around us grew eerily silent. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. Jake's demeanor changed as well. He became more serious, his eyes scanning the darkness. "You ever hear the legend of the Red Hollow werewolf?" he asked, his voice low. I chuckled. "Is this another one of your spooky stories to scare the city boy?" Jake shook his head. "I'm serious, Danny. The people here believe in it. They say that every full moon, a werewolf roams these woods, hunting for its next victim." I rolled my eyes. "Come on, Jake, you don't really believe that, do you?" He shrugged. "I didn't at first, but then I started hearing the stories. People disappearing, strange howls in the night. My grandfather swore he saw it once, back when he was a kid." We spent the next few hours talking about the legend. According to Jake, the werewolf of Red Hollow was a man who had been cursed many years ago. Some said he had angered a witch, while others claimed he was a victim of a cruel experiment. Regardless of the origin, the curse was passed down through generations. And now, the werewolf was said to be a bloodthirsty beast that could only be stopped by silver. I didn't believe a word of it, but as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig, made my heart race. I decided to turn in early, hoping that a good night's sleep would calm my nerves. I was jolted awake in the middle of the night by a loud, guttural howl. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat up, straining to hear any other sounds. The cabin was dark, and the only light came from the moon filtering through the window. I glanced over at Jake's bed, but it was empty. "Jake?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. There was no response. I got out of bed and cautiously made my way to the front door. The cabin was surrounded by darkness, and I could barely see a few feet in front of me. I stepped outside, my breath visible in the chilly air. "Jake!" I called out again, louder this time. A faint rustling sound came from the edge of the forest. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way towards the noise, my heart pounding. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and shadows. I felt a sense of dread wash over me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. As I turned to head back to the cabin, I heard another howl, closer this time. It was unlike anything I had ever heard, a mix of a wolf's cry and a man's scream. I froze, my flashlight shaking in my hand. Then I saw it, a pair of glowing eyes staring at me from the darkness. The creature stepped into the light, and I felt my blood run cold. It was a massive, hulking figure, covered in matted fur. Its eyes were a haunting shade of yellow, and its teeth glinted in the moonlight. The werewolf. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear as the creature slowly advanced towards me. Just as it was about to pounce, a figure appeared out of nowhere, tackling the beast to the ground. It was Jake. "Run, Danny," he shouted, struggling to keep the werewolf at bay. I snapped out of my trance and sprinted back to the cabin, slamming the door behind me. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Jake was out there, fighting a monster, and I had left him behind. I searched the cabin for anything that could be used as a weapon. My eyes landed on an old hunting rifle mounted on the wall. I grabbed it and loaded it with the silver bullets Jake had mentioned earlier. With a deep breath, I headed back outside, determined to help my friend. The sounds of the struggle guided me to a small clearing. Jake and the werewolf were locked in a fierce battle, both covered in cuts and bruises. I raised the rifle, trying to get a clear shot, but they were moving too fast. "Jake, get out of the way," I shouted. He glanced at me and nodded, using all his strength to throw the werewolf off balance. It stumbled, giving me a clear shot. I took aim and fired, the silver bullet hitting its mark. The werewolf let out a blood-curdling howl and collapsed to the ground, writhing in pain. Jake limped over to me, his face pale and covered in sweat. "You did it, Danny," he said, his voice weak. "You killed it." We watched as the werewolf's body began to change, shrinking and transforming back into its human form. To my shock, the man lying on the ground was someone I recognized. The town's reclusive blacksmith, Mr. Granger. Jake explained that Mr. Granger had been the werewolf for years, hiding his secret from the townspeople. He had tried to control the curse, but the beast within him was too powerful. The legend was true, and we had finally put an end to it. In the days that followed, the town of Red Hollow slowly returned to normal. The people were grateful to us, and we were hailed as heroes. But the experience left a mark on me. I could no longer dismiss the supernatural as mere stories. I had faced a monster and survived, and my view of the world was forever changed. Jake and I returned to our lives, but we made a pact to stay in touch and watch each other's backs. The legend of the Red Hollow werewolf would live on, but we had put an end to its reign of terror. And I knew that, no matter what, I would always be ready to face whatever darkness lurked in the shadows. It was the summer of 1998 when I decided to take a much-needed break from the hustle and bustle of city life. My name is Ben, and I had recently gone through a rough patch at work. As an overworked software developer, I found myself burning out and desperately needing a change of scenery. My colleague, Sarah, suggested I visit her family's old cabin in the remote town of Timber Ridge. I was hesitant at first, but the thought of spending a week in nature, away from screens and deadlines, was too tempting to pass up. Timber Ridge was a small town nestled deep in the heart of the forest, far from the nearest city. The drive there was long and winding, but as I left the urban landscape behind, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The air was fresh, and the scenery was breathtaking. Towering pines lined the road, and the sound of birds chirping replaced the constant hum of traffic. I arrived at the cabin in the late afternoon. It was a quaint, rustic structure that had clearly seen better days, but it had a certain charm to it. Sarah had told me that her family rarely used it anymore, so I wasn't surprised to find it covered in dust and cobwebs. After a quick clean-up, I settled in and made myself comfortable. That evening, decided to take a walk in the woods. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the landscape. As I strolled along a narrow trail, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature, and I felt more relaxed than I had in months. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and I headed back to the cabin. I lit a fire in the old stone fireplace and settled down with a book. The flickering flames and the crackling of the fire were soothing, and I soon found myself dozing off. I was jolted awake by a loud, guttural howl that echoed through the woods. My heart raced as I sat up, straining to hear any other sounds. The fire had died down, and the cabin was shrouded in darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight and cautiously made my way to the window. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the forest. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary, but the howling continued, growing louder and more intense. It sounded like a wolf, but there was something unnatural about it. My mind raced with possibilities, but I tried to convince myself it was just a wild animal. The next morning, I decided to explore the town of Timber Ridge. It was a charming place, with old-fashioned shops and friendly locals. I struck up a conversation with the owner of the general store, an elderly man named Hank. "You hear those howls last night?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. I nodded. Yeah, it sounded like a wolf. Is that common around here? Hank shook his head. Not a wolf. More like a werewolf, if you ask me. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but Hank's expression remained serious. I'm not kidding, son. Folks around here have been hearing those howls for years. Some say it's the spirit of an old trapper who is cursed. Others think it's a creature that roams the woods during the full moon. I tried to brush off his words, but the memory of the eerie howl still lingered in my mind. As I explored more of the town, I heard similar stories from other locals. They spoke of disappearances, strange sightings, and an air of fear that hung over the town during the full moon. That evening, I returned to the cabin with a sense of unease. The sun was setting, and the forest grew darker and more foreboding. I tried to distract myself with a book, but my mind kept drifting back to the stories I had heard. As night fell, the howling began again. This time, it was closer, and I could feel the vibrations in my chest. I grabbed my flashlight and ventured outside, determined to find the source of the noise. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing the dense undergrowth and twisted trees. I followed the sound, my heart pounding with each step. The howls grew louder, and I soon found myself standing at the edge of a small clearing. In the center stood a massive, hulking figure covered in matted fur. Its eyes glowed a haunting shade of yellow, and its teeth glinted in the moonlight. I froze, unable to believe what I was seeing. The creature was a werewolf, just like the locals had described. It let out a bone-chilling howl and began to move towards me. I turned and ran, my flashlight bouncing wildly as I sprinted through the woods. I could hear the werewolf crashing through the underbrush behind me, its growls growing louder and more menacing. I stumbled and fell, the flashlight slipping from my grasp. The creature was almost upon me, and I could feel its hot breath on my neck. Just as I thought it was all over, a shot rang out, and the werewolf let out a pained yelp. I scrambled to my feet and saw Hank standing at the edge of the clearing, holding a rifle. The werewolf turned and fled into the darkness, and Hank rushed over to help me. "Are you okay?" he asked, his face pale. I nodded, still in shock. "What was that thing?" Hank shook his head. "I told you, it's a werewolf. It's been terrorizing this town for years. But it won't bother you again tonight." He helped me back to the cabin, and we barricaded the doors and windows. Hank explained that the werewolf was a man cursed to transform every full moon. The only way to kill it was with a silver bullet, and he had been hunting it for years. The rest of the night was uneventful, and the howling eventually stopped. The next morning, Hank and I ventured into the woods to track the creature. We followed a trail of blood and fur, but it eventually led to a dead end. The werewolf had escaped, but we knew it would return. I decided to cut my trip short and return to the city. The peaceful retreat I had hoped for had turned into a nightmare, and I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over Timber Ridge. I thanked Hank for saving my life, and promised to keep in touch. As I drove away from the town, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the werewolf chasing after me. The experience had left me shaken, and I knew I would never forget the terror of that night. Back in the city, I had to resume my normal life, but the memories of Timber Ridge haunted me. I found myself researching werewolf legends and stories, trying to make sense of what I had seen. The skeptics in me struggled to accept the reality of the supernatural, but the evidence was undeniable. Months passed, and I eventually received a letter from Hank. He had continued his hunt for the werewolf, and had finally succeeded in killing it. The town of Timber Ridge could now rest easy, free from the terror that had plagued it for so long. But for me, the experience had changed everything. I had faced a monster and survived, and my view of the world was forever altered. The darkness that lurked in the shadows was real, and I knew I would always be ready to confront it, no matter where it appeared. My name is Alex, and I've always been an outdoor enthusiast. Hiking, camping, fishing, you name it, I've done it. There's something about being in the wilderness that gives me a sense of freedom and peace. It was this love for nature that led me to a small town called Raven Hill, located in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Little did I know, this trip would be unlike any other. Raven Hill was a quaint little town, seemingly untouched by time. The locals were friendly, the air was crisp, and the scenery was breathtaking. I had rented a cabin on the outskirts of town, nestled at the base of a hill covered in dense forest. The place was perfect for a week-long retreat. My first few days were uneventful. I spent my time exploring the nearby trails, fishing in the clear streams, and enjoying the tranquility of the woods. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, with all the essentials I needed for a relaxing stay. The nights were especially peaceful, with the only sounds being the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. One evening, as I was sitting on the porch, sipping a cup of coffee, I noticed something unusual. The forest, which was usually alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, had fallen eerily silent. A sense of unease washed over me, but I brushed it off, thinking it was just my imagination. As the night grew darker, I heard a sound that sent shivers down my spine, low, guttural howl, unlike anything I had ever heard before. It was distant, but it echoed through the hills, growing louder and more menacing. My heart raced as I listened, trying to determine the source of the noise. I decided to investigate, grabbing my flashlight and heading into the woods. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing the twisted branches and thick undergrowth. The howling continued, and I followed it, my curiosity outweighing my fear. The trail led me deeper into the forest, where the trees grew thicker and the air colder. The howls became more frequent, and I could feel the vibrations in my chest. Suddenly, I stumbled upon a clearing, and in the center stood a massive figure, illuminated by the moonlight. It was a creature unlike any I had ever seen. Standing on two legs, it was covered in thick, dark fur, with piercing yellow eyes and razor-sharp claws. It let out another howl, and I realized with horror that I was looking at a werewolf. My instincts kicked in, and I turned to run, but the creature was fast. It lunged at me, its claws slashing through the air. I barely managed to dodge, stumbling over the uneven ground. My flashlight fell from my grasp, and I was plunged into darkness. I could hear the werewolf snarling and growling behind me, its hot breath on my neck. I knew I had to get back to the cabin, where I might have a chance of defending myself. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. Miraculously, I made it back to the cabin and slammed the door shut behind me. I barricaded it with whatever furniture I could find, my mind racing with fear and adrenaline. The werewolf's howls were now right outside, and I could hear it scratching at the door, trying to get in. I remembered reading somewhere that silver was the only thing that could harm a werewolf. I searched the cabin frantically, hoping to find something made of silver. In a drawer, I found an old silver candlestick, my only hope. The werewolf broke through the door, and I held the candlestick up like a weapon. The creature lunged at me, and I swung the candlestick with all my might. It struck the werewolf's side, and to my amazement, the creature recoiled in pain, letting out a blood-curdling scream. I took advantage of the moment and struck again, this time hitting it in the chest. The werewolf collapsed to the floor, writhing in agony. I continued to hit it until it stopped moving, its body transforming back into a human form before my eyes. I stood there, panting and shaking, staring at the lifeless body of what was once a man. I knew I had to leave Raven Hill immediately. I packed my things in a frenzy and drove through the night, not stopping until I was far away from that cursed place. The experience left me traumatized, and I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. I tried to find information about the man who had turned into the werewolf, but there was nothing in the news or local records. It was as if he had never existed. Years have passed since that night, but the memories are still vivid. I've returned to my love of the outdoors, but I'm much more cautious now. The world is a strange and mysterious place, and I've learned that there are things out there beyond our understanding. So, If you ever find yourself in the woods at night and hear a howl that chills you to the bone, remember my story. Some legends are real, and sometimes the monsters we fear are closer than we think. My name is Jordan, and I've always been an avid hunter. Growing up in Montana, I spent countless hours in the wilderness, tracking deer and elk through the dense forests of the Rocky Mountains. Hunting wasn't just a hobby for me. It was a way of life, but an encounter I had a few years ago forever changed the way I see the world. It was late October, and I had planned a solo hunting trip deep in the Rockies. The air was crisp, and the forest was painted with the vibrant colors of fall. I had been looking forward to this trip for months, eager to escape the daily grind and reconnect with nature. I arrived at my campsite in the early afternoon. The spot was perfectly secluded, with a clear view of the surrounding mountains and a nearby stream for fresh water. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and prepared for an evening hunt. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I grabbed my rifle and headed into the forest. The woods were eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves underfoot. I moved slowly, carefully scanning the area for any signs of game. After a few hours of fruitless searching, I decided to call it a night and head back to camp. As I turned to leave, I heard a distant howl that sent a shiver down my spine. I had heard wolves before, but this howl was different, more menacing. I stood still, listening intently as the howls grew closer. My heart raced as I realized that whatever was making that noise was heading straight for me. I quickly made my way back to camp, the howls echoing through the trees. Back at camp, I stoked the fire and tried to calm my nerves. The howling had stopped, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I double-checked my rifle and kept it within arm's reach as I settled down for the night. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by the sound of something moving outside my tent. I grabbed my rifle and cautiously unzipped the tent, peering into the darkness. The fire had died down to embers, casting a faint glow over the campsite. I couldn't see anything, but the feeling of unease persisted. I stepped out of the tent, my rifle at the ready. The moon was full, illuminating the forest with an eerie light. I scanned the area, my breath visible in the cold night air. Suddenly, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned and saw a massive figure standing at the edge of the clearing. The creature was unlike anything I had ever seen. It stood on two legs, towering over me, with its muscular frame covered in thick, dark fur. Its eyes glowed a sinister yellow, and its fangs glinted in the moonlight. It let out a low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. I raised my rifle, aiming at the creature's chest. My hands trembled, and I struggled to steady my aim. Before I could pull the trigger, the creature lunged at me with astonishing speed. I fired a shot, but it went wide, and the creature knocked me to the ground. I struggled to regain my footing, my mind racing with fear and adrenaline. The creature stood over me, its hot breath filling the air. I reached for my hunting knife, determined to defend myself. As I swung the knife, the creature caught my arm with its powerful jaws, tearing through flesh and bone. I screamed in pain, dropping the knife as I fell to the ground. The creature loomed over me, its eyes filled with primal rage. Just when I thought it was all over, a blinding light filled the clearing, and the creature recoiled, letting out a pained howl. I looked up to see a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, holding a torch. The creature backed away, snarling and growling, before turning and disappearing into the forest. The figure approached me, and I saw that it was an elderly man, his face weathered and lined with age. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gruff but filled with concern. I nodded, still in shock. "What was that thing?" The old man shook his head. "A werewolf. They've been haunting these woods for generations. You're lucky to be alive." He helped me to my feet and tended to my wounds. His name was Sam, and he was a local legend in these parts, known for his knowledge of the supernatural. He explained that the creature I had encountered was indeed a werewolf, a man cursed to transform under the light of the full moon. Sam had been hunting the werewolf for years, determined to rid the forest of its terror. He had been tracking it that night when he heard my screams and came to my rescue. We spent the rest of the night by the fire, with Sam, sharing stories of his encounters with the supernatural. The next morning, Sam and I set out to track the werewolf. We followed a trail of blood and broken branches, leading us deep into the forest. The trail eventually led to a cave hidden in the side of a hill. We approached cautiously, our weapons at the ready. Inside the cave, we found the werewolf, lying in a pool of blood. It had reverted to its human form, a man with a gaunt, haunted look in his eyes. He was barely alive, and as he took his last breath, he whispered, "Thank you." Sam explained that the man had been cursed many years ago and had been searching for a way to end his torment. By confronting the werewolf, I had unwittingly helped break the curse. The man had found peace in death, and the forest would be safe once more. I returned home with a newfound respect for the mysteries of the wilderness. The experience had left me scarred, both physically and emotionally, but it had also taught me the importance of courage and resilience. I continued to hunt, but I was always mindful of the legends and stories that surrounded the places I visited. Years later, I still think about that night in the Rockies. The howls of the werewolf, the terror I felt, and the bravery of an old man determined to protect his home. The world is full of mysteries, and sometimes, the monsters we fear are real. But with courage and determination, we can face them and find the strength to overcome even the darkest of nights. My name is Ben, and I've always considered myself a rational person. I work as a civil engineer, and my life revolves around calculations, blueprints, and concrete plans. That is, until last summer, when I found myself caught up in a nightmare that defied all logic and reason. I had taken a week off to visit my old college friend, Mark, who lived in a small town nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. Mark and I had been close during our university days, but life had taken us in different directions. He had settled into a quiet, rural life, while I had been swallowed up by the hustle and bustle of city living. This visit was meant to be a relaxing break, a chance to reconnect and reminisce about old times. The first few days were perfect. We hiked the scenic trails, fished in the clear mountain streams, and spent our evenings by the fireplace, talking about everything and nothing. It was a welcome escape from the pressures of my job, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. On the fourth night, Mark suggested we go for a late-night hike to a place called Wolf's Peak. The name struck me as ominous, but Mark assured me it was just a local legend. The peak offered a breathtaking view of the valley, and he promised it would be worth the trek. We set out around dusk, equipped with flashlights and a backpack filled with snacks and water. The trail to Wolf's Peak was steep and rugged, but the full moon provided ample light to guide our way. As we climbed higher, the forest grew thicker and the air cooler. We talked and laughed, the sounds of our voices mingling with the rustling leaves and distant hoots of owls. As we neared the peak, the atmosphere changed. The forest fell eerily silent, and a sense of unease settled over us. Mark seemed oblivious, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I dismissed it as paranoia and pushed on. We reached the peak just as the moon reached its zenith. The view was indeed spectacular, the valley bathed in silvery light. We sat on a rocky outcrop, catching our breath, and enjoying the serene beauty of the night. Then, without warning, we heard a sound that made my blood run cold, a low, guttural growl, echoing through the trees. Mark's face paled, and he whispered, "We need to leave. Now." I didn't need any convincing. We grabbed our gear and started back down the trail, moving as quickly and quietly as we could. The growling grew louder, and I could hear something large crashing through the underbrush, following us. My heart pounded in my chest as we stumbled through the darkness, our flashlights casting erratic beams of light. Suddenly, Mark tripped and fell, his flashlight skittering away. I helped him to his feet. But before we could continue, the creature emerged from the shadows. It was a werewolf, an enormous, hulking beast, with fur as dark as night and eyes that glowed with a malevolent light. It stood on two legs, its claws gleaming in the moonlight, and let out a bone-chilling howl. I was frozen with fear, unable to move or speak. Mark grabbed my arm, snapping me out of my stupor. "Run!" he shouted, and we bolted down the trail, the werewolf hot on our heels. I could hear its heavy breathing and the thud of its paws on the ground, closing the distance between us. We burst out of the forest and into a clearing, the lights of the town visible in the distance. The werewolf was right behind us, and I knew we wouldn't make it to safety. Desperation fueled my legs, but I could feel my strength waning. Just when I thought we were done for, a loud bang rang out, and the werewolf yelped in pain. A figure stepped into the clearing, wielding a shotgun. It was an old man, his face weathered and determined. He fired again, and the werewolf recoiled, growling and snarling. "Get to my truck," the man shouted, and we didn't hesitate. We sprinted to the edge of the clearing, where an old pickup truck was parked. The man backed towards us, firing at the werewolf and keeping it at bay. We jumped into the truck, and the old man floored the gas pedal, speeding away from the clearing. The werewolf chased us for a few moments before giving up, its howls fading into the distance. We drove in silence, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away. The man introduced himself as Jacob, a local hunter who had been tracking the werewolf for years. He explained that the creature had once been a man, cursed to transform under the full moon. The legend of Wolf's Peak was true, and many locals had fallen victim to the beast over the years. Jacob took us back to his cabin, where we spent the rest of the night in tense silence. The next morning, he drove us back to Mark's house, warning us to stay away from the forest during the full moon. Mark and I thanked him profusely, shaken but grateful for his help. The rest of my stay was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the memory of that night. The werewolf's glowing eyes haunted my dreams, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. When I finally returned to the city, I threw myself into my work, trying to forget the terror I had experienced. But some things can't be forgotten. The rational part of me still struggles to make sense of what happened, but deep down I know the truth. There are things in this world that defy explanation, creatures that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. So if you ever find yourself in the Blue Ridge Mountains during a full moon, remember my story. Be cautious, stay close to civilization, and above all, never venture to Wolf's Peak at night. Some legends are real, and the monsters we fear might be closer than we think. My name is Evelyn, and I've always been fascinated by the supernatural. As a folklore researcher, I've spent years investigating legends and myths from around the world. My work has taken me to remote villages, ancient ruins, and haunted forests. But nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered in the small town of Black Hollow. Black Hollow is a quaint, isolated town nestled in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Its history is steeped in mystery and superstition, with tales of witches, ghosts, and otherworldly creatures passed down through generations. I had come to Black Hollow to investigate one such legend, the story of the Black Hollow werewolf. According to local lore, a series of brutal murders had plagued the town every full moon for nearly a century. The victims were found torn apart, their bodies mangled beyond recognition. The townsfolk believed a werewolf was responsible, a creature cursed to transform under the light of the full moon. I arrived in Black Hollow a few days before the next full moon, eager to uncover the truth behind the legend. I had arranged to stay with an elderly woman named Martha, who had lived in the town her entire life, and had agreed to share her knowledge with me. Martha's house was a charming, old-fashioned cottage at the edge of town. She greeted me warmly and showed me to my room, a cozy space filled with antique furniture and faded photographs. That evening, we sat by the fireplace as Martha recounted the history of the Black Hollow werewolf. The first attack happened in the summer of 1823, Martha began, her voice tinged with sorrow. A young woman named Abigail was found dead in the woods, her body savagely mauled. The town was in an uproar, and people whispered of a beast that roamed the forest under the full moon. She paused, her eyes distant. Over the years, more attacks followed, each one more brutal than the last. The townsfolk became convinced that a werewolf was responsible, and many believed it was a curse placed upon the town by a vengeful witch. Despite countless attempts to track and kill the creature, it always managed to evade capture. Martha leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Some say the werewolf is still out there, waiting for the next full moon to strike again. Her words sent a shiver down my spine, but I was determined to uncover the truth. Over the next few days, I delved into the town's archives, poring over old newspapers, journals, and police reports. The accounts of the attacks were chilling, and the descriptions of the creature matched the classic image of a werewolf, an enormous, fur-covered beast with glowing eyes and razor-sharp claws. As the full moon approached, the tension in the town grew palpable. The streets emptied early, and people locked their doors and windows, fearful of what might come. I spent my days interviewing locals, gathering stories, and piecing together the history of the werewolf. On the night of the full moon, I decided to venture into the forest where the first attack had occurred. Armed with a flashlight, a notebook, and a camera, I set out to find any evidence that might shed light on the legend. The forest was dense and foreboding, the trees casting long shadows in the moonlight. I followed a narrow, winding path, my senses on high alert. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, made my heart race. I felt as though the forest itself was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. After what felt like hours, I reached a small clearing. The moonlight bathed the area in a silvery glow, and I could see the remnants of an old, crumbling stone structure, an abandoned cabin, perhaps. I moved closer, my flashlight illuminating the decaying wood and overgrown vegetation. Suddenly, heard a low growl behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood a massive figure. It was the werewolf, its eyes glowing with a sinister light. The creature's fur was dark and matted, its muscles rippling beneath its skin. I was frozen with fear, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. The werewolf stepped closer, its growl deepening. I fumbled for my camera, hoping to capture a photograph, but my hands were trembling too much to focus. Just as the werewolf lunged at me, a shot rang out, and the creature yelped in pain. I turned to see Martha standing at the edge of the clearing, holding a rifle. She fired again, and the werewolf staggered, blood oozing from its wounds. With a final, anguished howl, the creature turned and fled into the forest. Martha rushed to my side, her face etched with worry. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, still in shock. "How did you know I was here?" "I had a feeling you might come," she replied. "And I couldn't let you face the werewolf alone." We returned to Martha's house, where she tended to my wounds and made me a cup of tea. As we sat by the fireplace, she explained that she had been tracking the werewolf for years, determined to end the curse that had plagued her town. "The werewolf is real," she said softly. "But it's also a monoman, cursed to transform under the full moon. His name is Samuel, and he was once a friend of my family. He was cursed by a witch many years ago, and he's been trapped in this nightmare ever since." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "I've been trying to find a way to break the curse, but it's not easy. The witch who cursed Samuel was powerful, and her magic is not easily undone." Over the next few days, Martha and I worked together to research the curse and find a way to break it. We consulted ancient texts, spoke to local historians, and even visited the site where the witch had been buried. It was a daunting task, but we were determined to save Samuel and end the werewolf's reign of terror. Finally, we discovered a ritual that promised to break the curse. It required a combination of rare herbs, a silver amulet, and a full moon. We gathered the necessary ingredients and prepared for the next full moon, hopeful that we could succeed. On the night of the ritual, we returned to the clearing in the forest. The moon was full and bright, casting an eerie light over the area. We performed the ritual, chanting the ancient words and placing the herbs and amulet in a circle. As we completed the ritual, the werewolf emerged from the shadows, its eyes filled with rage and pain. Martha and I stood our ground, determined to see it through. The creature stepped into the circle, and a blinding light enveloped it. When the light faded, the werewolf was gone, and in its place stood a man with kind eyes and a weary expression. It was Samuel, freed from the curse at last. Tears filled Martha's eyes as she embraced her old friend. "Thank you," Samuel whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. We returned to town, and the news of Samuel's transformation spread quickly. The townsfolk were overjoyed, and the fear that had gripped Black Hollow for generations began to lift. I returned to my life as a researcher, but the experience in Black Hollow stayed with me. It was a reminder that some legends are rooted in truth, and that courage, determination, and a little bit of magic can overcome even the darkest of curses. My name is Evelyn, and I've always been fascinated by the supernatural. As a folklore researcher, I've spent years investigating legends and myths from around the world. My work has taken me to remote villages, ancient ruins, and haunted forests. But nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered in the small town of Black Hollow. Black Hollow is a quaint, isolated town nestled in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Its history is steeped in mystery and superstition, with tales of witches, ghosts, and otherworldly creatures passed down through generations. I had come to Black Hollow to investigate one such legend, the story of the Black Hollow werewolf. According to local lore, a series of brutal murders had plagued the town every full moon for nearly a century. The victims were found torn apart, their bodies mangled beyond recognition. The townsfolk believed the werewolf was responsible, a creature cursed to transform under the light of the full moon. I arrived in Black Hollow a few days before the next full moon, eager to uncover the truth behind the legend. I had arranged to stay with an elderly woman named Martha, who had lived in the town her entire life, and had agreed to share her knowledge with me. Martha's house was a charming, old-fashioned cottage at the edge of town. She greeted me warmly and showed me to my room, a cozy space filled with antique furniture and faded photographs. That evening, we sat by the fireplace as Martha recounted the history of the Black Hollow werewolf. The first attack happened in the summer of 1823. Martha began, her voice tinged with sorrow. A young woman named Abigail was found dead in the woods, her body savagely mauled. The town was in an uproar, and people whispered of a beast that roamed the forest under the full moon. She paused, her eyes distant. Over the years, more attacks followed, each one more brutal than the last. The townsfolk became convinced that a werewolf was responsible, and many believed it was a curse placed upon the town by a vengeful witch. Despite countless attempts to track and kill the creature, it always managed to evade capture. Martha leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Some say the werewolf is still out there, waiting for the next full moon to strike again." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, but I was determined to uncover the truth. Over the next few days, I delved into the town's archives, poring over old newspapers, journals, and police reports. The accounts of the attacks were chilling, and the descriptions of the creature matched the classic image of a werewolf, an enormous, fur-covered beast with glowing eyes and razor-sharp claws. As the full moon approached, the tension in the town grew palpable. The streets emptied early, and people locked their doors and windows, fearful of what might come. I spent my days interviewing locals, gathering stories, and piecing together the history of the werewolf. On the night of the full moon, I decided to venture into the forest where the first attack had occurred. Armed with a flashlight, a notebook, and a camera, I set out to find any evidence that might shed light on the legend. The forest was dense and foreboding, the trees casting long shadows in the moonlight. I followed a narrow, winding path, my senses on high alert. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, made my heart race. I felt as though the forest itself was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. After what felt like hours, I reached a small clearing. The moonlight bathed the area in a silvery glow, and I could see the remnants of an old, crumbling stone structure, an abandoned cabin, perhaps. I moved closer, my flashlight illuminating the decaying wood and overgrown vegetation. Suddenly, heard a low growl behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood a massive figure. It was the werewolf, its eyes glowing with a sinister light. The creature's fur was dark and matted, its muscles rippling beneath its skin. I was frozen with fear, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. The werewolf stepped closer, its growl deepening. I fumbled for my camera, hoping to capture a photograph, but my hands were trembling too much to focus. Just as the werewolf lunged at me, a shot rang out, and the creature yelped in pain. I turned to see Martha standing at the edge of the clearing, holding a rifle. She fired again, and the werewolf staggered, blood oozing from its wounds. With a final, anguished howl, the creature turned and fled into the forest. Martha rushed to my side, her face etched with worry. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, still in shock. "How did you know I was here?" "I had a feeling you might come," she replied. "And I couldn't let you face the werewolf alone." We returned to Martha's house, where she tended to my wounds and made me a cup of tea. As we sat by the fireplace, she explained that she had been tracking the werewolf for years, determined to end the curse that had plagued her town. "The werewolf is real," she said softly. "But it's also a monoman, cursed to transform under the full moon. His name is Samuel, and he was once a friend of my family. He was cursed by a witch many years ago, and he's been trapped in this nightmare ever since." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "I've been trying to find a way to break the curse, but it's not easy. The witch who cursed Samuel was powerful, and her magic is not easily undone." Over the next few days, Martha and I worked together to research the curse and find a way to break it. We consulted ancient texts, spoke to local historians, and even visited the site where the witch had been buried. It was a daunting task, but we were determined to save Samuel and end the werewolf's reign of terror. Finally, we discovered a ritual that promised to break the curse. It required a combination of rare herbs, a silver amulet, and a full moon. We gathered the necessary ingredients and prepared for the next full moon, hopeful that we could succeed. On the night of the ritual, we returned to the clearing in the forest. The moon was full and bright, casting an eerie light over the area. We performed the ritual, chanting the ancient words and placing the herbs and amulet in a circle. As we completed the ritual, the werewolf emerged from the shadows, its eyes filled with rage and pain. Martha and I stood our ground, determined to see it through. The creature stepped into the circle, and a blinding light enveloped it. When the light faded, the werewolf was gone, and in its place stood a monoman with kind eyes and a weary expression. It was Samuel, freed from the curse at last. Tears filled Martha's eyes as she embraced her old friend. "Thank you," Samuel whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. We returned to town, and the news of Samuel's transformation spread quickly. The townsfolk were overjoyed, and the fear that had gripped Black Hollow for generations began to lift. I returned to my life as a researcher, but the experience in Black Hollow stayed with me. It was a reminder that some legends are rooted in truth, and that courage, determination, and a little bit of magic can overcome even the darkest of curses. My name is Rachel, and I've always been a skeptic when it comes to the supernatural. As a journalist, I've made a career out of debunking myths and exposing frauds. But last October, I found myself in the small town of Pine Creek, facing a story that would challenge everything I believed. Pine Creek is a picturesque town nestled in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. I had come to cover the annual Harvest Festival, a week-long celebration filled with pumpkin carving, hayrides, and local crafts. It was supposed to be a light-hearted assignment, a break from the usual hard-hitting news stories I covered. On my first night in town, I checked into a charming bed and breakfast owned by a friendly couple, Linda and Tom. They welcomed me warmly and gave me a brief history of Pine Creek. The town had a rich heritage, with traditions dating back to the early settlers. After settling in, I decided to explore the town and get a feel for the festival. The main street was lined with quaint shops and cafes, all decorated for the season. Children in costumes ran about, and the air was filled with the scent of apple cider and freshly baked pies. As I wandered through the town, I struck up a conversation with an elderly man named Henry, who was sitting on a bench outside the general store. Henry had lived in Pine Creek his entire life, and was more than happy to share stories about the town's history. "You know," he said, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper, "Pine Creek has its fair share of legends. One of the most famous is the tale of the Hunter's Moon werewolf." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I've never heard of it. What's the story?" Henry leaned back, a glint of excitement in his eyes. "They say that every year, during the Hunter's Moon, a werewolf roams the forests around Pine Creek. The creature is said to be a cursed hunter, doomed to transform under the light of the full moon. Over the years, there have been reports of livestock being slaughtered, strange howls in the night, and even sightings of the beast itself." I listened, fascinated but skeptical. "Has anyone ever seen this werewolf up close?" Henry nodded. "A few have claimed to, but those who have don't talk about it much. The fear is real, though. When the Hunter's Moon rises, folks around here lock their doors and stay indoors." I thanked Henry for the story, my curiosity piqued. While I didn't believe in werewolves, I knew that legends often had some basis in truth. I decided to dig deeper and see if there was any substance to the tale. The next day, I visited the local library and combed through old newspapers and town records. To my surprise, there were numerous accounts of strange occurrences and unexplained animal attacks dating back over a century. While none of the reports definitively proved the existence of a werewolf, they were enough to keep the legend alive. That evening, as the sun set and the Hunter's Moon began to rise, I decided to investigate the forest myself. I packed a flashlight, a camera, and a voice recorder, and set out on one of the hiking trails that led into the woods. The forest was dense and shadowy, the trees casting long, eerie shadows in the moonlight. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig made my heart race. I reminded myself that I was a skeptic, that there was a rational explanation for everything. After about an hour of hiking, I reached a small clearing. The moon was high in the sky, bathing the area in a silvery light. I paused to catch my breath and take a few photos, trying to capture the beauty of the scene. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the trees. I froze, my pulse quickening. The growl was followed by the sound of heavy footsteps, getting closer and closer. I turned, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but I saw nothing. Then, out of the shadows, a figure emerged. It was a werewolf, an enormous, fur-covered beast with glowing yellow eyes and sharp, gleaming fangs. The creature's presence was both terrifying and mesmerizing, its sheer size and power overwhelming. I took a step back, my mind racing. The werewolf snarled, its eyes fixed on me. I knew I had to act fast. I fumbled for my camera, trying to get a shot, but my hands were shaking too much to focus. The werewolf lunged, and I stumbled backward, my flashlight falling to the ground. Just as the creature was about to strike, a deafening roar filled the air. A figure burst into the clearing, wielding a silver-tipped spear. The werewolf turned to face its new adversary, and I took the opportunity to scramble to my feet. The figure, a tall, muscular man with long, dark hair and a determined expression, ended the werewolf in a fierce battle. The creature fought back with ferocity, but the man's skill and agility were unmatched. I watched in awe as the man landed a blow with the silver spear, causing the werewolf to howl in pain. The creature staggered, and with a final, powerful thrust, the man drove the spear into its heart. The werewolf let out one last, anguished cry before collapsing to the ground. The man turned to me, his expression serious. "Are you all right?" I nodded, still in shock. "Who are you?" He wiped the sweat from his brow and extended a hand. "My name is Daniel. I'm a hunter, and I've been tracking this werewolf for years." I took his hand, grateful for his help. "Thank you, you saved my life." Daniel nodded, his gaze shifting to the fallen werewolf. This creature was once a man, cursed to transform under the hunter's moon. It's a tragic fate, but it had to be stopped. As we made our way back to town, Daniel explained that he was part of an ancient order of hunters dedicated to protecting humanity from supernatural threats. The werewolf of Pine Creek had been one of their most elusive targets. But thanks to Daniel's skill and determination, the creature's reign of terror was finally over. The town of Pine Creek was overjoyed to hear that the werewolf had been defeated. The legend that had haunted them for generations was finally put to rest, and the fear that had gripped the town began to fade. I returned to the city with a newfound respect for the supernatural and a story that would captivate my readers. While I remained a skeptic at heart, I couldn't deny the evidence of my own eyes. Some legends, it seemed, were rooted in a reality far stranger than fiction. As for Pine Creek, the town continued to celebrate its harvest festival, but with a renewed sense of security. The memory of the werewolf would live on in their stories, a reminder of the courage and strength that had saved them from the darkness. And every year, when the hunter's moon rose, I would remember that night in the Forsyth night I came face to face with a legend and discovered that some myths are real. My name is Eric, and for most of my life, I've lived in the shadow of Blackwood Forest. It's a dense, sprawling expanse of trees and underbrush that stretches for miles, a place of natural beauty and hidden dangers. The locals always spoke of it with a mix of reverence and fear, for Blackwood Forest was said to be cursed. The stories of the forest were as old as the town itself. They told of travelers who ventured too deep and never returned, of eerie howls echoing through the night, and of creatures that defied explanation. The most enduring legend was that of the Blackwood werewolf, a beast that prowled the woods under the full moon, its hunger insatiable. As a child, I dismissed these tales as mere folklore, the product of overactive imaginations. But as I grew older, I began to hear more about the disappearances and unexplained deaths, and my skepticism wavered. The forest seemed to hold a dark secret, one that I couldn't ignore. One autumn evening, curiosity got the better of me. The moon was full, casting an ethereal glow over the landscape, and I decided to venture into Blackwood Forest. Armed with a flashlight and my camera, I set out to uncover the truth behind the legend. The air was crisp and cool, the scent of pine and damp earth filling my nostrils. The forest was eerily silent, the only sound the crunch of leaves underfoot. As I walked deeper into the woods, the trees closed in around me, their twisted branches creating a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. After about an hour of hiking, I reached a small clearing. I paused to catch my breath and take a few photos, the flash of my camera briefly illuminating the darkness. Suddenly, I heard a low growl, followed by the sound of something moving through the underbrush. My heart raced as I turned, my flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. I caught a glimpse of something large and hairy, its eyes glowing in the darkness. Panic set in, and I stumbled backward, my flashlight slipping from my grasp. Before I could react, the creature lunged at me. It was a werewolf, its massive form towering over me. I could see the glint of its fangs, the wildness in its eyes. In that moment, I knew I was facing the Blackwood werewolf. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline surging through my veins. The werewolf growled, advancing slowly. I backed away, my mind racing for a way to escape. Suddenly, a figure burst into the clearing, wielding a silver-tipped spear. The newcomer, A woman with long, dark hair and piercing blue eyes confronted the werewolf without hesitation. She moved with a grace and confidence that spoke of years of training. The werewolf snarled, but she stood her ground. "Get back!" she shouted at me, her voice firm and commanding. I didn't need to be told twice. I retreated to the edge of the clearing, watching in awe as the woman engaged the werewolf. The battle was fierce, the werewolf's strength and speed pitted against the woman's skill and agility. She struck with precision, the silver spear slicing through the air. The werewolf howled in pain as the spear found its mark, its fury intensifying. But the woman was relentless, her determination unwavering. With a final, powerful thrust, she drove the spear into the werewolf's heart. The creature let out one last, anguished cry before collapsing to the ground, its body twitching before going still. The woman turned to me, her expression serious, but not unkind. "Are you all right?" I nodded, still in shock. "Who are you?" She wiped the sweat from her brow and extended a hand. "My name is Elena. I'm a hunter, part of an order dedicated to protecting people from creatures like this." I took her hand, grateful for her help. "Thank you, you saved my life." Elena nodded, her gaze shifting to the fallen werewolf. "This creature was once a man, cursed to transform under the full moon. It's a tragic fate, but it had to be stopped." As we made our way back to the edge of the forest, Elena explained that the Blackwood werewolf was one of the most feared and elusive creatures her order had ever hunted. The curse that afflicted it was ancient, dating back to the early settlers who had angered a powerful spirit. The town of Blackwood was relieved to hear that the werewolf had been defeated. The legend that had haunted them for generations was finally put to rest, and the fear that had gripped the town began to fade. I returned home with a newfound respect for the supernatural and a story that would captivate my readers. While I remained a skeptic at heart, I couldn't deny the evidence of my own eyes. Some legends, it seemed, were rooted in a reality far stranger than fiction. As for Blackwood Forest, it continued to be a place of natural beauty and hidden dangers. The memory of the werewolf would live on in the town's stories, a reminder of the courage and strength that had saved them from the darkness. And every year, when the full moon rose, I would remember that night in the Forsyth night I came face to face with a legend and discovered that some myths are real. My name is Mark, and I've always been drawn to the unexplained. As a freelance photographer and writer, I travel to remote locations, documenting forgotten places and the stories behind them. My latest assignment took me to a small, abandoned village in the heart of the Appalachians, a place steeped in mystery and legend. The village, known as Hollow Creek, was once a thriving mining community. But over the years, strange occurrences and unexplained disappearances led to its abandonment. The most persistent legend was that of the Hollow Creek werewolf, a creature said to haunt the surrounding woods. I arrived at the village late in the afternoon, the sun casting long shadows over the dilapidated buildings. The air was thick with the scent of pine and decaying wood. As I walked through the empty streets, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My research had revealed that Hollow Creek had been abandoned in the early 1900s after a series of brutal attacks. Livestock and villagers alike had fallen victim to a vicious predator, and the survivors spoke of a beast with glowing eyes and sharp fangs. Despite numerous hunting parties, the creature was never caught, and the attacks continued until the village was finally deserted. I set up my camp in the center of the village, planning to spend a few days exploring and photographing the area. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and an eerie silence settled over Hollow Creek. I sat by my campfire, reviewing my notes and the old, yellowed photographs of the villagers who had once called this place home. Around midnight, I heard a low, guttural growl coming from the edge of the village. My heart pounded as I grabbed my flashlight and camera, the beam cutting through the darkness. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. I knew I should stay put, but curiosity got the better of me. I moved cautiously toward the sound, my camera ready. The growl turned into a snarl, and suddenly, a figure burst from the shadows. It was a werewolf, its massive form illuminated by the moonlight. The creature's eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its fangs glistened with saliva. I snapped a photo, the flash startling the beast. It roared in anger, and I stumbled backward, my flashlight slipping from my grasp. The werewolf advanced, its eyes fixed on me. Just as it was about to pounce, a shot rang out, and the creature howled in pain. A man stepped into view, rifle in his hands. He fired again, and the werewolf retreated into the woods, its growls fading into the night. The man turned to me, his expression stern. "Are you all right?" he asked, lowering his rifle. I nodded, still shaken. "Who are you?" "My name is Jack," he replied. "I've been tracking that werewolf for years. It's responsible for the deaths that led to this village being abandoned." Jack explained that he was a descendant of one of the original villagers, and had dedicated his life to hunting the creature that had terrorized his ancestors. He had come to Hollow Creek hoping to put an end to the werewolf's reign of terror once and for all. The next day, Jack and I explored the village together. He shared stories of his ancestors and the horrors they had faced. We discovered old journals and letters that spoke of the fear and desperation that had gripped the village during the attacks. As night fell, we prepared for another encounter with the werewolf. Jack had set traps and laid out silver bullets, hoping to weaken the creature. We sat by the campfire, waiting in tense silence. Around midnight, the werewolf returned. This time, it was enraged, its eyes burning with fury. It tore through the village, setting off the traps and howling in pain. Jack fired his rifle, each shot finding its mark, but the creature was relentless. In the chaos, the werewolf lunged at me, and I barely managed to dodge its claws. Jack shouted for me to run, but I knew I couldn't leave him to face the beast alone. Grabbing a fallen branch, I swung at the werewolf, catching it across the snout. It snarled and turned its attention to me, giving Jack the opportunity he needed. With a final, well-aimed shot, Jack hit the werewolf in the heart. The creature let out a blood-curdling howl before collapsing to the ground. Its body convulsed, then went still. We stood in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over us. Jack approached the fallen werewolf, his expression one of both relief and sorrow. "It's over," he said quietly. "The curse is finally broken." I spent the next few days documenting the aftermath, capturing photos of the village and the now lifeless werewolf. Jack shared his family's history with me, and I wrote an article that would later be published, telling the story of Hollow Creek and the bravery of the people who had fought to protect it. The village of Hollow Creek remained abandoned, a silent testament to the horrors that had once plagued it. But the legend of the Hollow Creek werewolf would live on, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk in even the most beautiful places. As I left the village, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The curse that had haunted Hollow Creek for generations had finally been lifted, thanks to Jack and his determination. And I had a story that would captivate my readers, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and the enduring human spirit. And every time I looked at the photos I had taken, I would remember the night I faced the werewolf of Hollow Creek and lived to tell the tale. My name is Jessica, and I've always been drawn to the mysteries of the wilderness. As a park ranger, my job takes me to some of the most remote and beautiful places in the country. Red Rock Canyon, with its rugged cliffs and ancient forests, was my latest assignment. Little did I know, it would also be the site of my most terrifying encounter. Red Rock Canyon had always been a place of legend. The locals spoke in hushed tones about the strange happenings in the area. Disappearances, eerie howls echoing through the night, and sightings of a monstrous creature under the full moon. They called it the Red Rock Werewolf. Skeptical by nature, I dismissed these stories as mere folklore. But as I settled into my new post, the unease among the residents became palpable. They avoided the canyon during the full moon, and the fear in their eyes was unmistakable. One evening, I decided to investigate the source of these legends. It was a clear night, the full moon casting an ethereal glow over the canyon. Armed with my flashlight, a camera, and a sense of adventure, I set out on the winding trail that led into the heart of the forest. The deeper I ventured, the more oppressive the silence became. The usual sounds of the forest chirping insects, rustling leaves were absent. It was as if the entire area was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I reached a clearing, the moonlight filtering through the trees and casting long shadows on the ground. I paused to take a few photos, my camera's flash briefly illuminating the darkness. Suddenly, I heard a low growl, followed by the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. My heart raced as I turned, my flashlight beam sweeping through the shadows. I caught a glimpse of something massive and furry, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. Panic set in, and I stumbled backward, dropping my flashlight. Before I could react, the creature lunged at me. It was a werewolf, its hulking form towering over me. I could see the glint of its fangs, the wildness in its eyes. In that moment, I knew I was facing the Red Rock werewolf. Desperation fueled my actions as I scrambled to my feet and ran. The werewolf gave chase, its growls echoing through the forest. I could feel its hot breath on my neck, its claws just inches from my back. Just when I thought I was done for, a figure burst out of the trees, wielding a silver-tipped spear. The newcomer, a tall man with dark hair and a determined expression, confronted the werewolf without hesitation. He moved with the skill of a seasoned hunter, each strike of his spear precise and calculated. The werewolf snarled, but he stood his ground. "Get back," he shouted at me, his voice firm and commanding. I didn't need to be told twice. I retreated to the edge of the clearing, watching in awe as the man battled the werewolf. The struggle was intense, the werewolf's strength and speed pitted against the hunter's skill and determination. With a final, powerful thrust, the hunter drove the spear into the werewolf's heart. The creature let out one last, anguished cry before collapsing to the ground, its body twitching before going still. The man turned to me, his expression serious, but not unkind. "Are you all right?" I nodded, still in shock. "Who are you?" He wiped the sweat from his brow and extended a hand. "My name is Daniel. I'm part of an order dedicated to hunting and destroying creatures like this." I took his hand, grateful for his help. "Thank you, you saved my life." Daniel nodded, his gaze shifting to the fallen werewolf. This creature was once a man, cursed to transform under the full moon. It's a tragic fate, but it had to be stopped. As we made our way back to the edge of the forest, Daniel explained that the Red Rock werewolf was one of the most feared and elusive creatures his order had ever hunted. The curse that afflicted it was ancient, dating back to the early settlers who had angered a powerful spirit. The next day I met with Daniel again. He showed me his collection of journals and artifacts, each one documenting his hunts and the creatures he had faced. It was a world I had never known existed, a world of darkness and danger, hidden just beneath the surface of our own. As the weeks passed, Daniel and I grew closer. He taught me how to recognize the signs of a werewolf's presence, how to defend myself against their attacks. I learned that the order he belonged to had been protecting humanity for centuries, their existence known only to a select few. One evening, as the full moon rose once more, Daniel and I set out into the forest together. We had received reports of another werewolf sighting, and we knew we had to act quickly. Armed with silver weapons and our newfound bond, we ventured into the darkness. The werewolf was cunning, its attacks swift and brutal. But together, Daniel and I were able to outmaneuver it, driving it back into the depths of the forest. In the end, it was Daniel who delivered the final blow, his spear piercing the creature's heart. As we stood over the fallen werewolf, I realized how much my life had changed. The world of the supernatural, once a distant legend, had become a part of my reality. And with Daniel by my side, I knew I had found my true calling. Red Rock Canyon remained a place of beauty and mystery, its secrets hidden beneath the ancient trees. The legend of the Red Rock werewolf lived on, a reminder of the darkness that could lurk in the most unexpected places. But now, the people of Red Rock Canyon could rest easier knowing that there were those who stood between them and the darkness. And as long as there were creatures to hunt and curses to break, Daniel and I would be there, fighting to protect the world from the terrors that hid in the shadows. My name is Tom, and for as long as I can remember, I've been fascinated by the unknown. As a wildlife biologist, my work often takes me into uncharted territories, studying elusive creatures and unraveling the mysteries of nature. However, nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered in the Black Hills of South Dakota. The Black Hills are a place of rugged beauty, filled with dense forests, towering granite peaks, and hidden valleys. It's a region steeped in Native American legend and folklore. And among the most persistent tales is that of a werewolf, a creature said to roam the hills under the light of the full moon. I arrived in the Black Hills in late September, just as the leaves were beginning to turn. My task was to study the local wolf population, tracking their movements and behaviors. Despite my scientific focus, I couldn't ignore the stories that the locals shared with me. They spoke of strange howls in the night, livestock mutilations, and sightings of a massive wolf-like creature. One evening, as the full moon rose, I set out on a solo expedition to a remote part of the forest where recent sightings had been reported. Armed with my camera, a notebook, and a tranquilizer gun for protection, I ventured deeper into the wilderness. The air was crisp, the forest alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures. As I made my way through the underbrush, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I stopped to take some photos of a particularly scenic spot when I heard a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath my feet. Turning slowly, I saw it. Emerging from the shadows was a massive figure, its fur a dark, matted gray. The creature's eyes glowed an unnatural yellow, and its teeth gleamed in the moonlight. It was a werewolf, more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. My heart raced as I raised my camera, snapping a few quick photos. The flash seemed to anger the beast, and it let out a deafening roar before charging at me. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. I knew I had to act quickly if I wanted to survive. Fumbling with the tranquilizer gun, I aimed and fired. The dart hit the werewolf in the shoulder, but it barely slowed down. Desperation surged through me as I fired again, this time striking its chest. The werewolf staggered, then fell to the ground, its body twitching as the tranquilizer took effect. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature was still breathing, but it was unconscious. Up close, I could see the human-like features beneath the fur, the telltale signs of the curse that had transformed it. As I pondered my next move, I heard a rustling in the bushes behind me. Spinning around, I came face to face with an older man, his expression a mix of surprise and concern. "You actually caught it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "Who are you?" I asked, still on edge. "My name is Samuel," he replied. "I've been tracking this werewolf for years. It's been terrorizing these hills for generations." Samuel explained that he was a descendant of the Lakota tribe, and his ancestors had passed down the knowledge of the werewolf's curse. The creature before us was once a man, cursed to transform into a werewolf under the full moon. The curse could only be broken by a ritual that involved both the hunter and the beast. Together, we carried the unconscious werewolf to a clearing where Samuel had prepared a sacred circle. He instructed me to stay close and follow his lead. As he began the ritual, chanting in a language I didn't understand, I felt a strange energy fill the air. The werewolf began to convulse, its body shifting and changing. Slowly, the fur receded, and the monstrous features softened. Before my eyes, the creature transformed back into a monoman, who looked disoriented and weak, but undeniably human. Samuel knelt beside the man, speaking softly to him. The man, whose name was John, had no memory of his time as a werewolf. He had been cursed many years ago, and the transformation had taken over his life. With Samuel's help, John began to heal, both physically and mentally. I documented the entire process, capturing photos and notes that would later form the basis of a groundbreaking article. The story of the Black Hills werewolf was one of tragedy and redemption, a testament to the power of ancient magic and the resilience of the human spirit. As I left the Black Hills, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The werewolf that had haunted these lands for generations was finally free, and the legends that had terrified the locals could now be put to rest. But the experience had also changed me. I had come face to face with the creature of legend, and I had witnessed the breaking of a curse. It was a reminder that the world is full of mysteries, some of which defy explanation. And as long as there are stories to be told and secrets to uncover, I knew I would continue my quest, driven by the thrill of the unknown. My name is David, and I work as a wildlife photographer. My job takes me to some of the most breathtaking and remote places on Earth. But nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered in Silverwood Forest. This dense, ancient woodland in the heart of New England had always been shrouded in mystery, with locals whispering about a terrifying creature that roamed the woods under the light of the full moon. The stories were hard to believe. Tales of a beast that was part wolf, part werewolf. I had heard similar legends before, but there was something about the way the villagers spoke of it, the fear in their eyes, that made me uneasy. They called it the Beast of Silverwood. I arrived in Silverwood on a chilly October evening, just days before the full moon. My assignment was to capture the autumnal beauty of the forest, but my curiosity about the beast's legend got the better of me. Armed with my camera and a journal, I decided to investigate the stories myself. The first few days were uneventful. The forest was a photographer's dream, with its towering oaks, cascading streams, and vibrant fall foliage. But as the full moon approached, the atmosphere began to change. The air grew colder, the nights longer, and an eerie silence settled over the woods. On the night of the full moon, I set out with my equipment, determined to uncover the truth. The sky was clear, the moonlight casting an ethereal glow over the forest. I followed a narrow trail that led deep into the heart of Silverwood, my senses on high alert. As I ventured deeper, I noticed something strange. The usual sounds of the forest were absent. No rustling leaves, no chirping insects, just an oppressive silence. My unease grew with each step, but I pressed on, driven by a mix of curiosity and determination. Suddenly, a distant howl pierced the silence. It was unlike any animal sound I had ever heard, deep, guttural, and filled with an otherworldly rage. My heart pounded in my chest as I continued along the trail, the howls growing louder and more frequent. I reached a small clearing and set up my camera, hoping to capture any movement. The moonlight illuminated the area, casting long shadows across the ground. Minutes passed, and then I saw a massive, shadowy figure moving between the trees. Raising my camera, I managed to snap a few photos before the creature stepped into the clearing. It was enormous, standing nearly 7 feet tall, covered in coarse, dark fur. Its eyes glowed a fierce yellow, and its snarling maw revealed sharp, gleaming teeth. It was a werewolf, and it was staring right at me. Panic surged through me, but I fought to stay calm. The werewolf began to advance, its growls growing louder. I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed my journal and began to sketch the creature, hoping to capture its likeness before it could reach me. Just as the werewolf lunged, a shot rang out. The creature yelped and staggered back. A silver bullet lodged in its shoulder. I turned to see an old man emerging from the shadows, a rifle in his hands. "Get back," he shouted, his voice commanding and authoritative. The werewolf snarled but retreated, disappearing into the forest. The man approached me, his expression stern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes scanning me for injuries. I think so," I stammered. "Who are you?" "Name's Henry," he said, offering me a hand. "I've been hunting that beast for years." Henry explained that he was a retired game warden who had taken it upon himself to track and kill the werewolf that had been terrorizing Silverwood Forest. He had learned about the curse from his father, who had passed down the knowledge of the werewolf's existence and the means to combat it. Together, we made our way back to Henry's cabin on the edge of the forest. The place was filled with old books, maps, and various weapons, all tools in his lifelong hunt. Henry showed me his research, detailing the history of the werewolf curse that had plagued Silverwood for generations. According to legend, the curse began in the 17th century when a group of settlers accused a local woman of witchcraft and burned her at the stake. With her dying breath, she cursed the village, condemning one of its inhabitants to transform into a werewolf under the full moon. The curse had passed down through the generations, each afflicted individual becoming a monster and wreaking havoc on the village. Henry believed that the current werewolf was a direct descendant of the original victim, and that the only way to break the curse was to kill the beast with the silver bullet. As the days passed, I joined Henry in his hunt. We scoured the forest, setting traps and searching for any sign of the werewolf. The full moon rose again, and we knew we had to act quickly. On the night of the hunt, we set out into the forest, our nerves on edge. The howls began again, closer this time, and we knew the beast was near. We reached the same clearing where I had first seen the werewolf, and there it was, waiting for us. Henry raised his rifle, aiming carefully. The werewolf snarled and charged, but Henry's shot was true. The silver bullet struck the creature in the heart, and it let out a final, agonized roar before collapsing to the ground. We approached cautiously, and as the moonlight bathed the clearing, the werewolf's body began to change. The fur receded, the monstrous features softened, and before us lay a man, his face peaceful in death. The curse was broken. Henry and I buried the man in a secluded spot in the forest, marking his grave with a simple stone. We knew that the horrors of the past had finally come to an end, and the villagers of Silverwood could now live in peace. As I left Silverwood Forest, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The legend of the Beast of Silverwood was no longer a mystery, and the courage and dedication of one man had brought an end to the terror. My photos and journal entries from the experience became the basis for an article that captivated readers around the world. The story of the Silverwood werewolf was one of darkness, courage, and redemption. A reminder that even the most terrifying legends can have a human heart at their core. My name is Sarah, and I am an investigative journalist. My work has taken me to many strange and eerie places, but nothing could have prepared me for the horrors I uncovered in the small, secluded town of Harrowville. This quiet town in the Pacific Northwest seemed idyllic at first glance, but it hid a dark secret that had plagued its residents for decades. The rumors had reached my editor's desk, sightings of a werewolf, mutilated livestock, and people disappearing under the light of the full moon. Intrigued and eager for a gripping story, I packed my bags and headed to Harrowville. Upon arrival, I checked into the only motel in town. The receptionist, an older woman named Edith, eyed me warily as I signed in. "You here for the werewolf?" she asked bluntly. "Just doing some research," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. "Be careful," she warned. "This town's got more secrets than you can imagine." I spent the first few days talking to the locals, gathering stories, and piecing together the puzzle. The tales were consistent: a beast that roamed the woods at night, its howls echoing through the valleys, its eyes glowing an eerie red. Livestock found torn apart, and the occasional hiker or camper who ventured too far into the woods, never to return. One name kept coming up in my conversations: George Thompson. George was a recluse who lived on the outskirts of town, rumored to have more knowledge about the werewolf than anyone else. Determined to speak with him, I drove out to his cabin one foggy morning. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, almost hidden from view. As I approached, I could hear the sound of wood being chopped. George, a grizzled man in his late 60s, looked up from his work as I arrived. "What do you want?" he asked gruffly. "I'm Sarah, an investigative journalist." "I've heard you know about the werewolf," I said, trying to sound as respectful as possible. George studied me for a moment before nodding. "Come inside." The interior of the cabin was cluttered but cozy, filled with hunting trophies and old photographs. George offered me a cup of coffee, and we sat down at his kitchen table. "You're not the first to come looking for answers," he began. "But this story isn't for the faint of heart." George told me that the werewolf was real, a curse that had afflicted his family for generations. His great-grandfather had been bitten by a wolf during a hunting trip, and ever since, the curse had passed down through the male line. Every full moon, one of his ancestors would transform into a werewolf, unable to control the beast within. "My son, Robert, was the last," George said, his voice filled with sorrow. "He left town years ago, hoping to break the curse, but I fear it followed him." As he spoke, I could see the pain in his eyes, the weight of a burden carried for too long. George believed that the only way to end the curse was to kill the werewolf with a silver bullet. But he had never had the heart to hunt his own kin. "I've been preparing for years," he said, showing me a collection of silver bullets and a rifle. "But I'm too old now. The beast is out there, and it's more dangerous than ever." Determined to help, I offered to join him on the hunt. George was reluctant at first, but he eventually agreed. We spent the next few days preparing, studying maps, and setting up traps in the woods. The full moon was approaching, and we knew our time was running out. On the night of the full moon, we set out into the forest, the air thick with tension. The moonlight cast eerie shadows through the trees, and every rustle of leaves sent a shiver down my spine. We reached a clearing where we had set up our main trap, and we waited, our breath visible in the cold night air. Hours passed, and then we heard a distant howl that sent chills down my spine. The werewolf was near. We took our positions, George with his rifle and me with a flashlight and a camera, ready to capture whatever happened. The beast emerged from the shadows, its form monstrous and terrifying. It was larger than any wolf I had ever seen, its fur dark and matted, its eyes glowing a menacing red. The werewolf moved with a predatory grace, sniffing the air as it approached the clearing. George aimed his rifle, his hand steady despite his age. He fired, and the silver bullet struck the werewolf in the shoulder. The beast roared in pain, but instead of fleeing, it charged at us, its eyes filled with rage. I stumbled backward, snapping photos frantically, my heart pounding in my chest. George fired again, this time hitting the werewolf in the chest. The creature staggered, its growls turning into whimpers. Slowly, it began to change, its fur receding, its body shrinking. Before our eyes, the werewolf transformed back into a young man, his face contorted in pain and confusion. It was Robert. George rushed to his son's side, tears streaming down his face. "Robert, it's over," he whispered. "The curse is broken." Robert looked up at his father, a mixture of relief and sorrow in his eyes. "Thank you, Dad," he murmured before succumbing to his injuries. We buried Robert in a quiet glade, marking his grave with a simple wooden cross. The curse that had haunted George's family for generations was finally lifted, but the cost had been high. I returned to my motel, my mind reeling from the events of the night. The photos I had taken were both horrifying and poignant, capturing the moment when the beast became a man once more. My article would tell the world about the curse of Harrowville, the tragedy of George and Robert, and the bravery it took to end the nightmare. As I left Harrowville, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The werewolf that had terrorized the town was gone, and the residents could finally live in peace. But the experience had changed me, deepening my respect for the mysteries of the world and the courage it takes to confront them. The story of the werewolf of Harrowville would be one I would never forget, a testament to the enduring power of love, sacrifice, and the human spirit. My name is Ethan, and I have always been a skeptic when it comes to supernatural phenomena. As a freelance journalist specializing in debunking myths and legends, I had spent years exposing hoaxes and bringing rational explanations to light. But my latest assignment took me to a remote village in Eastern Europe, where I would come face to face with a legend that defied all logic. The village of Bran was nestled in the shadow of the Carpathian Mountains, a place steeped in folklore and mystery. The locals spoke in hushed tones about a creature that prowled the forests on nights of the full moon, a werewolf. According to the villagers, it was a beast of immense strength and ferocity, responsible for countless disappearances and gruesome deaths over the centuries. I arrived in Bran just before the full moon, determined to uncover the truth. The village was quaint and picturesque, with cobblestone streets and medieval architecture. But there was an undercurrent of fear that was impossible to ignore. The villagers avoided eye contact and whispered among themselves as I walked by, clearly uneasy about my presence. My first stop was the village inn, a rustic establishment run by a burly man named Ivan. As I checked in, I noticed the walls were adorned with crucifixes and other religious symbols, a clear indication of the villagers' deep-seated superstitions. "You hear about the werewolf?" Ivan asked, his voice gruff. "Yes," I replied. "I'm here to investigate the legend." Ivan shook his head. "You won't find anything but trouble. That creature is real, and it's taken many lives. Be careful." Undeterred, I spent the next few days interviewing the locals and exploring the surrounding forests. The stories were consistent: a monstrous beast that emerged on nights of the full moon, attacking livestock and, occasionally, humans. I noted the details carefully, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the legend than met the eye. One name kept coming up in my conversations: Father Gabriel. The village priest was said to have extensive knowledge about the werewolf and its origins. Intrigued, I decided to pay him a visit. Father Gabriel's church was a modest stone building on the outskirts of the village. Inside, the air was cool and filled with the faint scent of incense. The priest, a tall, gaunt man with piercing blue eyes, greeted me warmly. "Welcome, my son," he said. "How can I help you?" "I've heard you know about the werewolf," I said, getting straight to the point. Father Gabriel nodded solemnly. "Yes, I do. It is a curse that has plagued our village for centuries." He explained that the curse dated back to the 15th century, when a band of soldiers, led by a ruthless warlord named Vlad, had terrorized the region. Vlad had been known for his cruelty, and one night, during a particularly brutal raid, he had encountered a witch in the forest. Enraged by his actions, the witch had cursed him, condemning him and his descendants to transform into werewolves under the full moon. "Vlad's descendants still live among us," Father Gabriel said. "The curse has been passed down through the generations, and the current werewolf is one of them." "Do you know who it is?" I asked. Father Gabriel hesitated. "There are rumors, but nothing concrete. The curse can only be broken if the werewolf is killed with a silver bullet." I thanked the priest for his time and left the church, my mind racing with possibilities. If the legend was true, then one of the villagers was a werewolf, living a double life and hiding a terrible secret. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, I spent the next few days gathering information and observing the villagers. One man, in particular, caught my attention: Alexei, a reclusive farmer who lived on the outskirts of the village. He was known for his temper and had a reputation for disappearing on nights of the full moon. As the full moon approached, I decided to confront Alexei. Armed with my camera and a silver bullet I had acquired from a local hunter, I made my way to his farm. The night was cold and clear, the moon casting an eerie glow over the landscape. I reached Alexei's farmhouse and knocked on the door. There was no answer, but I could hear movement inside. Slowly, I opened the door and stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The interior of the farmhouse was cluttered and unkempt, with old furniture and hunting trophies adorning the walls. I moved cautiously, my senses on high alert. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the room, and I turned to see Alexei standing in the doorway, his eyes glowing an unnatural yellow. "Who are you?" he snarled, his voice a guttural growl. "I'm here to stop you," I said, raising my camera. Alexei's form began to change before my eyes. His muscles bulged, his limbs elongated, and dark fur sprouted from his skin. Within moments, he had transformed into a monstrous werewolf, towering over me with bared fangs. I backed away, fumbling for the silver bullet. The werewolf lunged at me, its claws slashing through the air. I fired my camera's flash, momentarily blinding the beast, and then took aim with the bullet. The shot rang out, and the silver bullet struck the werewolf in the chest. The creature howled in agony, its form convulsing and writhing. Slowly, it began to revert to its human shape, and Alexei collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. Alexei looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and relief. "Thank you," he whispered. "You've freed me." With that, he took his last breath, and the curse was lifted. The villagers were stunned when I told them what had happened. For the first time in centuries, they could live without fear of the werewolf's wrath. Father Gabriel performed a solemn funeral for Alexei, and the village began to heal. As I left Bran, I didn't help but reflect on the experience. The werewolf legend had been real, and I had been part of a story that would be passed down for generations. The curse was broken, but the memory of the beast and the bravery it took to confront it would live on. My article about the werewolf of Bran captured the world's attention. But the real reward was knowing that I had helped bring peace to a village haunted by its past. The experience had changed me, deepening my respect for the power of legends and the strength of the human spirit. The story of the werewolf of Bran was one I would never forget. A testament to the enduring battle between darkness and light, and the courage it takes to face the unknown. My name is Emily, and I've always been drawn to stories of the supernatural. As a paranormal investigator, I've encountered my fair share of ghosts, spirits, and unexplained phenomena. But nothing could have prepared me for the chilling mystery that awaited me at Silver Lake. Silver Lake was a serene and picturesque spot nestled deep in the mountains of Colorado. Its tranquil waters and lush forests made it a popular destination for hikers and nature enthusiasts. But beneath its peaceful surface lay a dark secreta curse that had plagued the lake and its surrounding woods for centuries. I had heard whispers of the curse during my research, a tale of tragedy and revenge that had left an indelible mark on the land. According to local legends, a Native American tribe had once inhabited the area, living in harmony with nature. But when settlers arrived in search of gold, they brought with them greed and violence. One fateful night, tensions between the settlers and the tribe reached a boiling point. A brutal massacre ensued, leaving many dead on both sides. In the aftermath, a curse was placed upon the land by the tribe's shamanic curse that condemned anyone who set foot in the area to suffer the same fate as those who had perished that night. Determined to uncover the truth, I packed my bags and set off for Silver Lake. The journey was long and arduous, the mountain roads winding and treacherous. As I approached the lake, a sense of unease settled over me, as if the land itself was warning me to turn back. I checked into a rustic cabin on the shores of the lake, the only accommodation for miles. The caretaker, an elderly man named Jacob, eyed me warily as he handed me the keys. "You here for the curse?" he asked gruffly. "I'm here to investigate," I replied cautiously. Jacob nodded knowingly. "Be careful, miss. There are things in these woods that don't take kindly to strangers." Undeterred, I spent the first few days exploring the area, talking to locals, and gathering stories. The tales were chilling: hikers who had vanished without a trace, campers who had heard eerie whispers in the night, and fishermen who had seen strange lights dancing on the lake surface. One name kept coming up in my conversations: Sarah Whitehorse, an elderly woman who lived alone in a cabin deep in the woods. According to the locals, Sarah was a descendant of the tribe's shaman and held ancient knowledge about the curse. Intrigued, I decided to seek her out. Sarah's cabin was hidden in a remote clearing, surrounded by towering pine trees. As I approached, I could sense a palpable energy in the air, as if the spirits of the past were watching me. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding with anticipation. The door creaked open, revealing a frail woman with deep, piercing eyes. "You seek answers," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," I replied. "I want to know about the curse." Sarah studied me for a long moment before inviting me inside. Her cabin was small but cozy, filled with artifacts and trinkets that spoke of a rich and ancient heritage. We sat by the fireplace, and Sarah began to tell me the story of Silver Lake. Generations ago, she explained, her ancestors had lived in harmony with the land, honoring the spirits and the natural world. But when the settlers arrived, they brought with them greed and destruction. The massacre that followed had left a stain on the land, a curse that could never be lifted. "The spirits are restless," Sarah said solemnly. "They haunt these woods, seeking vengeance for the wrongs committed against them." I listened intently as Sarah recounted tales of strange happenings around the lake, disembodied voices, shadowy figures that darted through the trees, and eerie lights that danced on the water's surface. She spoke of a portal between the worlds, a thin veil that separated the living from the dead. Determined to uncover the truth, I spent the next few nights conducting investigations around the lake. Armed with cameras, voice recorders, and other paranormal equipment, I ventured into the woods after dark, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. One night, as I stood on the shore of the lake, a thick fog rolled in, obscuring my vision. I could hear faint whispers in the air, voices that seemed to echo from the depths of the forest. Suddenly, the water before me began to churn, as if something unseen was stirring beneath the surface. I raised my camera and began to take photos, hoping to capture whatever was causing the disturbance. The air grew colder, and I could feel eyes watching me from the darkness. Just as quickly as it had begun, the fog lifted, and the lake returned to its calm, serene state. Back at my cabin, I reviewed the photos and recordings, searching for any signs of paranormal activity. As I listened to the voice recordings, I heard faint whispers and eerie laughter, voices that sent a chill down my spine. The photos revealed strange orbs of light hovering above the lake, their shapes shifting and morphing. I knew then that I had stumbled upon something beyond my understanding, a force that defied logic and reason. The curse of Silver Lake was real, its presence felt in every shadow and whisper. But as I prepared to leave, I couldn't help but feel a sense of reverence for the land and its ancient spirits. As I drove away from Silver Lake, I knew that my journey was far from over. The curse would continue to haunt the land, its secrets buried deep within the mountains. But I had witnessed something extraordinary, a glimpse into a world where the past and present converged, where the spirits of the past still roam. The story of Silver Lake would stay with me forever, a reminder of the power of the supernatural and the mysteries that lie hidden in the most unexpected places.